Have you ever felt so lost, so broken by the world that you believed all hope was gone forever? What if in that profound darkness a whisper of life appeared in the most unexpected of places, forcing you to choose between the safety of your sorrow and the terrifying risk of fighting for something again? This is the story of a man who had buried his heart and the desperate young mother who would give him a reason to let it beat once more. In the wild, untamed highlands of Scotland, where the wind howls ancient secrets across misty lochs and the jagged peaks stare at the clouds, a man lived in a silence of his own making. Kael, a name that once meant warrior in the tongue of his ancestors, was now just a word whispered by the gorse and heather. At 35 his soul was as weathered and grey as the standing stones that dotted the landscape. His face tanned by a lonely sun, and etched with the lines of a grief too deep for tears, carried the scars of a past he never spoke of. His eyes, once the bright, fierce blue of a winter sky, were now like two deep, still pools reflecting nothing but loss. His dark hair, the color of raven feathers, fell unkempt around his shoulders, no longer bound in the proud braids of his clan. He was a clansman without a clan, a protector with nothing left to protect, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. 3 years. 3 long years had passed since the day the world ended. 3 years since he'd returned from a hunting trip to find his home a smoldering pyre of blackened timber and ash. English redcoats enforcing a landlord's cruel eviction had swept through his village like a plague, silencing the laughter of children and the songs of his people. Kael had arrived too late to save his wife, the radiant Elara, and their 2 small children. But he had arrived soon enough to see what remained. Since that day he had built a new life from the emptiness. He took shelter in an abandoned shepherd's bothy, a small stone cottage tucked away in a hidden glen far from any road or sign of settlement. The structure was crude stone and sod, but it was strong against the wind and rain. It had a single room for living and a small, attached byre where the shepherd had once kept his tools and sheltered his flock. Kael had cleaned the space, using it to store the dried meats from his hunts and the meager supplies he needed to exist. It was a place of profound quiet, broken only by the rush of the wind through the pines and the occasional cry of a lone fox in the distance. For 3 years this rigid routine had been his shield, keeping the sharpest edges of memory at bay. He would rise before the dawn when the world was a wash of soft grey and purple and venture into the highlands to hunt. He knew every game trail, every hidden spring, every sheltered hollow for miles. The red deer and the wild goats of the mountains had grown accustomed to his silent presence, and he had learned to take only what was necessary for his own stark survival. But on this particular October night, as the first brutal storm of autumn lashed against the stone walls of the bothy with a fury unseen for months, something shattered the grim peace of his sanctuary. Kael was sitting by the small peat fire that warmed the room, his hands moving with practiced, mechanical grace as he sharpened the blade of his dirk. It was then that a sound strange and out of place pricked his ears. At first he dismissed it as the wind rattling the old wooden door of the byre. But as he stilled his hands and listened more intently, he could distinguish something else. A soft rhythmic sound. Almost musical. An unwelcome flutter started in his chest, a ghost of a heartbeat he hadn't felt in years. His hands froze their work. It had been so long since he'd heard any sound other than those of nature that any disruption immediately put him on high alert. The sound continued, a faint counterpoint to the drumming of the rain. Kael rose slowly from his stool, his warrior's instincts dormant for so long stirring from their slumber. He picked up his hunting knife and crept to the small, grimy window that looked out towards the byre. The night was a swirling blackness. He could barely make out the shape of the outbuilding, but he knew something was in there. For a heart-stopping second his mind betrayed him, flashing back to a different night, a different storm when the faint cries of his own children would wake him, and he would rise to soothe them back to sleep. His breath hitched in his throat, and he leaned against the cold stone wall to steady himself. The memories were like daggers twisting in his chest, reminding him of everything he had lost. It's just an animal, he told himself, trying to quiet the tremor that had started in his hands. A fox, perhaps a stray lamb seeking refuge from the stone. But a deeper part of him, a part he thought had died, knew that wasn't true. There was something different about this sound, something that disturbed him in a way he couldn't explain. The rain intensified, and with it the sound from the byre grew clearer. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Kael moved to the old wooden chest where he kept his musket. His movements were precise, calculated, the motions of a predator preparing for a threat. But deep within his soul, a piece of him that had slept for 3 years was beginning to wake. He unlatched the heavy door of the bothy, and the frigid night air hit him like a physical blow. The rain soaked through his thin linen shirt instantly, but he didn't even notice. His eyes, long accustomed to the darkness, could just make out the byre some 20 yards away. The door was slightly ajar, creaking on its rusty hinges with the force of the wind, and it was from within that gap that the sound was emanating. He moved with a hunter's stealth, his feet finding sure perches on the rocky ground, avoiding the puddles that had formed in the mud. Each step was measured, silent, a skill honed over a lifetime of tracking prey through these very hills. When he reached the byre door, he paused, listening with an intensity that bordered on painful. The sound was much clearer now, and his heart stopped dead in his chest when he finally recognized it. It was a cry. The unmistakable, desperate wail of a human baby. Kael felt the world spin, his legs grew weak, and he had to brace himself against the door frame. It couldn't be. Not here. In this God-forsaken place in the middle of nowhere, there could not be a crying baby. His rational mind screamed at him that he was hallucinating, that the years of isolation and grief had finally broken him. But the crying continued, and now he could hear something else beneath it. Another cry, a slightly different pitch. 2 babies. There were 2 babies in his byre. With a trembling hand he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The darkness was nearly absolute, but his eyes adjusted quickly. In the far corner, amongst a pile of old sheepskins he used for curing hides, he could make out a small huddled form. It was a person, a young woman, and in her arms were 2 tiny, squirming bundles. "Don't come any closer," a voice whispered, a voice fractured by fear and exhaustion. It was a woman's voice, young, speaking in a soft lowland dialect he barely recognized. "Please don't hurt us. We were just looking for a place to get out of the rain." Kael stood frozen. For 3 solid years, he had not spoken to another human being. Now a woman with 2 infants had appeared in his byre like phantoms in the stone. The rain hammered on the roof, a chaotic symphony accompanying this surreal tableau. "Who are you?" he asked at last, his own voice a rough, gravelly thing from disuse. "What are you doing here?" The woman didn't answer right away. Instead she pulled the tiny bundles closer to her chest as if to shield them with her own body. Kael could see she was shivering not just from the cold but from pure terror. "My name is Elara," she whispered finally. "These are my children. We have nowhere else to go." The byre door was open. "I didn't think anyone would be here in this storm." Kael slowly lowered his musket, realizing the woman posed no threat. On the contrary, she looked fragile, utterly depleted, as if she had been walking for days without rest. Her clothes were soaked through and caked with mud, and even in the dim light he could see she was desperately thin. "Where did you come from?" he asked, taking a cautious step closer. The babies had quieted, but he could hear their shallow, ragged breaths. "From far away," Elara replied, and there was a sorrow in her voice so profound it echoed in Kael's own broken heart. "We've been walking for days. My children, they need food and warmth. I didn't know what else to do." At that moment one of the babies began to cry again, a thin, desperate sound that pierced Kael's soul like an arrow. The cry awoke the ghosts of his own children, the memories of nights when he and Lyra would rise to comfort their little ones. But it also awoke something else, something that had been buried under 3 years of pain and solitude. Compassion. "Come," he said at last, holding out a hand towards the woman. "You can't stay here. It's too cold. The Banes will take ill." Elara looked at him with disbelief, but the desperation in her eyes was stronger than her fear. She slowly, painfully got to her feet, clutching the 2 babies to her chest. Kael could see now how young she was, perhaps 19 or 20 at most, with delicate features that spoke of a gentle upbringing. Her dark hair was a tangled, muddy mess, but her eyes held a quiet dignity that not even her suffering had managed to extinguish. "Thank you," she breathed, and in that single, simple word there was a world of gratitude and hope. As they walked towards the bothy through the driving rain, Kael felt something deep inside him shift irrevocably. After 3 years of self-imposed exile, after 3 years of believing he had lost everything that mattered, fate had placed before him a desperate woman with 2 children who needed the very things he thought he'd lost the ability to give: care, protection, love. The night was no longer his alone. And for the first time in 3 years, Kael didn't feel quite so lost in the dark. The inside of the small stone bothy was transformed by the presence of Elara and her children. The space that had been Kael's silent refuge for 3 years, a place where he could hide from his own memories, now hummed with a different kind of energy. The soft whimpers of the infants, the soothing whispers of their mother, the simple sounds of human movement filled every corner with a life he had forgotten could exist. Kael added more peat to the fire, watching as the flames danced and cast warm, flickering shadows on the stone walls. Elara had settled on the floor near the hearth, the 2 babies cradled in her arms, gently rocking one while the other slept against her chest. The golden light of the fire illuminated her face, revealing a beauty that her suffering had not been able to completely erase. "They're hungry," Elara murmured, looking down at her children with a mixture of profound love and heart-wrenching despair. "I haven't been able to feed them properly for days. I've barely eaten myself." Her voice broke on the last words, and Kael could see the glint of tears in her eyes. Without a word, Kael went to his small store of supplies. He took a piece of dried venison he had prepared weeks ago, placed it in a pot of water and began to boil it to make a nourishing broth. He also prepared an infusion of herbs he knew would help a nursing mother produce milk, knowledge passed down through generations of his clan, knowledge that now served a purpose beyond his own survival. "How old are they?" he asked, as he worked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. 3 weeks, Elara replied, stroking the tiny head of one of her babies. "They were born on the estate where I worked, but we couldn't stay." Her voice turned bitter-laced, with a sadness that spoke of betrayal and pain. Kael turned to look at her, studying her expression. In his years as a clansman, he had learned to read people's faces, and in Elara's he saw something he knew all too well. The mark of unjust suffering, the kind of pain that leaves invisible but permanent scars. "What happened?" he asked, gently handing her a bowl of the hot broth. Elara took the bowl with trembling hands, and for a moment she just drank, letting the warm, nourishing liquid fortify her. When she was done, she wiped away the tears that had begun to fall down her cheeks and looked Kael straight in the eye. "I worked at Blackwood Manor near the borderlands. I started there when I was 15. My mother had passed, and my father sent me into service to send money home. The Laird Silas Blackwood, he seemed a respectable man, married with grown children." She paused to soothe one of the babies who had begun to stir restlessly. "For 4 years I did my work without any trouble. Lady Beatrice, his wife, she was always cold to me, but I thought that was just her way. She was from a wealthy southern family, and I was just a Highland girl working in her house." Kael felt his jaw tighten. He had heard too many stories like this one. He had seen too much of the injustice inflicted upon his people by powerful, arrogant men. "What changed?" he asked, though in his heart he already knew the answer. "Silas, he started to look at me differently when I turned 18, Elara continued, her voice growing faint. "At first it was just glances, comments about how I'd blossomed. Then he started to find excuses to be alone with me. He'd say he needed help with his special accounts, that he trusted me more than the other girls." The peat fire crackled, filling the silence that followed her words. Kael could feel the tension in the air, the difficulty it took for Elara to tell her story. He had known women in his village who had endured similar fates, and every story filled him with a cold rage he had learned to control but never to extinguish. One night, Elara went on, her voice now barely a whisper. "He asked me to come to his study to help with some papers. Lady Beatrice was away visiting her sister in the city, and his sons were at their own estates. When I arrived, he had been drinking. He told me I was the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen, that he was in love with me." Kael's hands clenched into fists at his sides, feeling that old, familiar anger stir in his chest. "You don't have to say more if you don't want to," he said quietly. But she shook her head. "I need to," she whispered. "I need someone to know the truth." I tried to leave the study, but he grabbed my arm. "He told me I was his servant, that he paid for me, that I owed him my obedience. When I tried to scream, he covered my mouth. I fought, but he was so much stronger." Tears were falling freely down her face now, and one of the babies began to cry as if sensing its mother's pain. Elara soothed him instinctively, but her story spilled out. "After that night everything was different. He threatened me. He said if I told anyone he would cast me out without a reference and make sure I never found work again. He told me no one would believe a Highland serving girl over a respected Laird like him. And he was right. Who would have believed me? Kael moved closer and sat across from her, his eyes filled with a deep, knowing compassion. "I believe you," he said simply. And those 3 words seemed to unleash something inside Elara. "He kept coming to my room at night," she continued. "I tried to hide to avoid him, but it was impossible. He controlled everything in that house. When I realized I was expecting, I thought maybe he would do the right thing. Maybe he would help me, give me some money to go away and raise my child in peace." Her laugh was a bitter, humorless sound. "But when I told him, his face changed completely. He accused me of trying to trap him, of using a pregnancy to blackmail him. He said I was just like all Highland folk, liars and manipulators. He threatened to throw me out on the spot if I ever spoke of it again." Kael felt his heart break at the injustice of it all. He had seen it too many times, the way the powerful preyed on the weak and then blamed them for their own wickedness. "What did you do?" he asked. "I tried to keep working to hide the pregnancy as long as I could," Elara answered. "But when I couldn't hide it any longer, Lady Beatrice found out. She confronted me in front of all the other staff, screaming at me that I was a disgrace, that I had dishonored her house with my wanton behavior." Elara shifted the sleeping babies. "I told her the truth about what had happened, but she slapped me and called me a liar. She said her husband was a godly man who would never touch a filthy Highland girl like me, that I must have been with some stable boy and was now trying to blame her family." She looked down at the twins with infinite love. "When they were born, I thought maybe things would get better, but it was worse." Lady Beatrice said she couldn't have Highland bastards in her Christian home. "She told me I was a bad influence on the other staff, that my presence was an offense to God." Kael looked at the tiny infants, so perfect and innocent, and felt a profound rage toward those who could reject such helpless creatures. "How did you get here?" he asked. "Silas. He gave me a purse with a few coins and told me to be gone before dawn," Elara replied, her voice thick with pain. "He told me if I ever came back, or if I told my story in the nearby village, he would make sure that my children and I disappeared for good. I left that night with my babies, not knowing where to go. I've been walking for days," she continued, "sleeping where I could, eating what I could find. My babies were crying constantly because I didn't have enough milk for them. When I saw this buyer, I thought it might be a temporary shelter just for one night." Kael felt something profound move within him. For 3 years he had been focused only on his own pain, on his own loss. But now, faced with this young woman who had endured so much, who had been so utterly betrayed by those who should have protected her, he felt his purpose in life beginning to sharpen once more. "You don't have to keep running," he said at last. "You can stay here. I will protect you and your children." Elara looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and hope. "Why would you do this for us? You don't even know me." Kael looked into the fire, seeing the ghosts of his own lost family in the dancing flames. "Because I know what it is to lose everything you love. I know what it is to feel alone in this world. And I know that sometimes, just when we think there is no hope left, fate gives us a second chance." He turned back to her, and there was a resolve in his eyes she hadn't seen there before. "My own children would have been about your age had they lived. My wife, she would have taken in any woman who needed help. Your staying here isn't just for you, it's to honor the memory of those I lost." Elara began to weep, but for the first time they were tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I can ever repay this kindness." "There is nothing to repay," Kael answered. "Just promise me you will raise your children to be better than the men who hurt you. Promise me you will teach them that honor and compassion are worth more than power and wealth." "I promise," Elara said, hugging her babies close. "I promise you." That night, as Elara and her children slept by the fire, Kael stayed awake watching the flames. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel completely lost. He had found a new purpose, a reason to wake each morning that went beyond simple, bleak survival. He didn't know what the future held for them, but he was certain of one thing. He would not let Elara and her children suffer any more injustice. He had failed to protect his own family, but this time would be different. This time he would be ready to fight for the ones who had placed their trust in him. In the quiet of the night, as the rain continued to fall softly on the roof, Kael felt his dead heart begin to beat again with a purpose he thought was lost forever. The first pale rays of dawn filtered through the bothy's small window, illuminating a scene Kael hadn't witnessed in 3 long years. A family sleeping peacefully by the embers of a fire that had been kept alive through the night. Elara lay on her side, her 2 babies nestled against her, and for the first time since he'd found her, her face was a mask of serenity instead of terror. Kael had been awake for most of the night, not only to tend the fire but because he couldn't stop watching the tiny infants. Finn, the firstborn, as Elara had told him, had darker features and a shock of black hair. Willow, the smaller twin, was more delicate, with a dusting of hair that shone with coppery tints in the firelight. They both had the same cinnamon-toned skin, a beautiful inheritance from their mother and the strength of their Highland lineage. When Elara stirred and opened her eyes, the first thing she did was look around with a flash of alarm, as if for a moment she had forgotten where she was. But when she saw Kael preparing a morning meal of hot porridge by the fire, her expression softened and a shy smile touched her lips. "Good morning," she murmured, sitting up carefully so as not to wake the babies. "I can't believe I slept so deeply. I haven't felt that safe in weeks." "Fear is exhausting," Kael replied, handing her a wooden bowl of the porridge sweetened with a touch of wild honey. "When the soul can rest, the body will follow." Elara tasted the food and closed her eyes in pure bliss. "This is delicious. I haven't had anything warm in so long." She paused, looking at Kael with curiosity. "How did you learn to cook like this?" I thought Highland warriors didn't concern themselves with household tasks." A shadow passed over Kael's face. "My wife Elara, she taught me. She used to say that a complete man must know how to care for his family in every way. After she was gone, I had to learn out of necessity." His voice softened. "Cooking helped me remember her without so much of the pain." In the days that followed, Kael began to teach Elara everything she needed to know to survive in the Highlands. He showed her which plants were edible and which were poison, how to find clean water by following the flight of certain birds, how to read the signs of the weather in the clouds and the wind. Elara proved to be a remarkable student. Her mind was sharp and her powers of observation were keen. She had the ancestral wisdom of her Highland blood, even if she had grown up in a world that tried to deny that heritage. When Kael taught her how to track deer, she grasped the concepts faster than many of the young warriors he had once trained. "You have a natural instinct for it," he told her one afternoon as they examined the tracks of a stag near a stream. Your blood remembers what your mind was forced to forget. My grandmother used to tell me things like that, Elara replied, her fingers gently tracing the print in the mud. She was full-blooded clan folk, but my grandfather made her give up the old ways when they married. She always said that one day my roots would call me home. It was during one of these lessons that Kael noticed something extraordinary. The babies who had been so fussy and fretful during their first few days in the bothy were now calm and content. More than that, whenever he drew near, they would stop their whimpering and gaze up at him with bright, curious eyes. Look, Elara said one afternoon, pointing to where Kael had laid little Finn on a blanket while she prepared some herbs. The baby was watching the warrior's every move with fascination, making small cooing sounds of contentment. Children have pure souls, Kael explained, going over to stroke the baby's cheek softly. They don't see scars or differences. They only feel love. Willow, not to be outdone by her brother, stretched her tiny arms out towards Kael as he approached. Without thinking, the warrior lifted the little girl into his arms, and she snuggled into his chest as if she had been waiting for that moment her entire life. I never thought I would hold a baby again, Kael murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I thought that part of my life was over forever. Elara looked at him, her eyes full of understanding. Perhaps it wasn't over. Perhaps it was just waiting for the right moment to return. As the weeks turned into a month, the dynamic in the small stone cottage changed completely. Kael found himself waking in the night not just to stoke the fire but to help with the babies when they cried. Elara began to regain her strength, and with it her beautiful smile returned. The children grew healthy and happy, filling the small space with coos and gurgles that transformed the silent refuge into a home teeming with life. One evening, as Elara nursed Willow and Kael gently rocked Finn to sleep, she asked him the question she had been waiting for the right moment to ask. What happened to your family? She asked softly. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I think sometimes talking about the pain helps to heal it. Kael looked into the flames, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt he could speak of his loss without completely shattering. Her name was Lyra, he began. She was your age when we were wed. She was the most beautiful woman in our clan, but also the kindest. She never raised her voice, never spoke an ill word of anyone. We had 2 children. His voice grew softer. A boy, he was 5, and a girl, she was 3. They were perfect, full of life and curiosity. My son was already showing the signs of a great hunter. And my little girl, she had the soul of a healer. Elara said nothing, but her gaze encouraged him to continue. I was away on a hunt with the other men of the clan. A 3-day hunt. We were tracking a large herd of deer far from our lands. When we returned, we found only ashes where our village had been. Redcoats sent by a landlord who wanted our valley for his sheep. They came looking for fighters. We were not there, but they didn't care. His voice broke slightly. They killed everyone. The old, the women, the children. They made no distinction between the guilty and the innocent. I found my family huddled together beneath what was left of our home. They had tried to protect themselves, but they never stood a chance. Elara felt tears stream down her own cheeks. I am so sorry, she whispered. I can't imagine that pain. For 3 years I have lived with the rage, Kael continued. Rage at the soldiers, rage at myself for not being there to protect them, rage at a world that allows such things to happen. But since you arrived with the babies, that rage has started to transform into something else. Into what? Elara asked. Into purpose, he answered, looking down at the small infant sleeping peacefully in his arms. I have been reminded that love is stronger than hate, that creation is more powerful than destruction. That protecting a new family does not dishonor the one I lost. It was then that Elara said something that changed his perspective on their meeting entirely. Kael, she said, her voice filled with emotion. There is something I didn't tell you about my family. Something I only realized after the children were born. What is it? He asked, his curiosity piqued by her tone. My grandmother's name was Lyra, Elara said, watching his reaction. Lyra of the Heather Glen. When she was young, she was taken in service by a wealthy family. There she met my grandfather, who married her. But she never forgot her true clan name. Kael sat motionless, feeling the world shift on its axis. Lyra of the Heather Glen, he repeated. From the clan of the Grey Falcon. Yes, Elara confirmed. That was my great-grandmother. My own grandmother was named for her in her honor. Then we are kin, Kael whispered, his voice full of awe. Lyra of the Heather Glen was my own great-grandfather's eldest sister. Our families were bound together generations ago before the world tore them apart. In that moment they both understood. Their meeting was no accident. Fate, their ancestors, the great forces that governed the universe, had conspired to reunite two lost souls who belonged to the same ancient family. That's why the babies accepted you so easily, Elara said, amazed. That's why I felt safe with you from the very beginning. Our souls recognized each other before our minds did. Kael felt tears stream down his own cheeks, but for the first time in 3 years they were not tears of pain. They were tears of gratitude, of understanding, of a relief so profound it threatened to overwhelm him. The ancestors have healed my heart through you, he said, looking at Elara with a new understanding. They have given me a new family to love, to protect, to honor. It was in that moment of revelation and profound connection that the sound of galloping horses reached his ears. Kael tensed instantly, his warrior's instincts screaming of danger. He went to the window and could see the bobbing lights of torches moving in the distance. Hide with the children, he muttered urgently. Someone is coming, and I do not think they are friendly visitors. Elara's face went pale, and she clutched her babies tightly to her chest. Do you think it's him? She whispered in fear. I don't know, Kael answered, grabbing his musket. But I will not let anyone harm you. I promise you that. In the distance the lights drew closer, and with them a confrontation that would test everything Kael had just vowed to protect. His new family. His second chance at love. His reason for living. Everything was on the line. But this time he would not be too late. This time he would be ready to fight. The torches approached like a serpent of fire dancing in the highland darkness. Kael counted at least 8 riders, maybe more, advancing with the grim determination of men who had come to claim something they believed was theirs. The thud of hooves on the rocky ground echoed in the quiet night like war drums announcing a confrontation he had feared since the day he chose to protect Elara and her children. We know you're in there, you filthy Highlander, a booming arrogant voice shouted, cutting through the air like a whip. Send out the girl and my children or we'll burn this whole sty to the ground. Kael recognized the tone instantly. It was the voice of a man accustomed to having his orders obeyed without question, a man who had lived his entire life believing the world and everyone in it existed to serve him. Silas Blackwood had come to claim what he considered his property. Elara was hidden in the darkest corner of the bothy, her body a shield over her sleeping babies. Her eyes shone with a terror Kael knew all too well, the fear of the prey that knows its hunter has found its hiding place. The little ones Finn and Willow seemed to sense the tension in the air as they began to stir and whimper softly. "How many are there?" Elara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Too many to face head-on," Kael answered, but his own voice was calm, calculating. "But not all of them are soldiers. Some are just farmhands, men who follow orders for corn." Silas Blackwood dismounted from his horse, a magnificent black stallion that stood in grotesque contrast to the ugliness of its master. He was a man in his 50s, portly and red-faced, with a grey moustache and small cruel eyes that glinted with greed. He wore expensive clothes that were beginning to show signs of fraying, as if his fortunes were not as secure as he pretended. "Elara," he bellowed, his voice a mockery of paternal concern. "I know you are in there, girl. I've come to take you home. Your children need a proper roof over their heads, not this hovel in the middle of the wilderness." Kael felt a cold fury boil inside him. The hypocrisy of the man was sickening. He had violated and shamed Elara, cast her and her infant children out to die, and now he arrived pretending to be a savior. "They are not coming out," Kael answered, his own voice ringing with authority. "This woman and her children are under my protection. If you want them, you'll have to kill me first." Blackwood strode closer to the bothy, flanked by two armed men. "And who are you to interfere in a family matter?" he sneered. "Some wild savage living like an animal in the dirt." "I am Kael of the clan of the Grey Falcon," he answered with pride. "And these children are now my family. They carry the blood of the Highlands, a noble blood that you have defiled with your cowardice." Blackwood's face flushed with rage. "Those children are mine. They carry my blood. I will not allow them to be raised like wild animals." "Lies!" Elara cried out from within the bothy, her voice ringing with a newfound dignity that surprised everyone. "You never wanted these children. You called them bastards and threw us out like rubbish." Silas Blackwood flinched, realizing he had revealed more than he intended. "You are confused, my dear girl. The birth has affected your mind. I only ever wanted to protect your reputation." It was then that Elara made the bravest decision of her life. She stood up holding her babies and walked out of the bothy to face her tormentor. The light of the torches illuminated her face, revealing a woman transformed by motherhood and strengthened by true love. "Look at these children, Silas," she declared, holding up Finn and Willow for all to see. "Look at their faces and tell me you do not see your own features. But look also at the Highland blood that runs through their veins, the dignity they inherit from their ancestors." The babies, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, remained calm in their mother's arms. Their small faces showed the clear mix of their heritage, Blackwood's eyes, but the bone structure and skin tone of Elara. "These children are not your property," Elara continued, her voice growing stronger with every word. "They are human beings with a right to a decent life, a right to a family that truly loves them. Blackwood stepped closer, studying the infants' faces. For a fleeting moment something like paternal recognition flickered in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his familiar greed. "They are my heirs," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. "My legitimate sons are far away. My grandchildren are a long time coming." "These children could what?" interrupted Kael, stepping out of the bothy with his musket in hand. "Be raised by the man who violated their mother? Grow up believing that power gives you the right to harm the innocent? You know nothing of this, savage," Blackwood roared. "These are matters for civilized men." "Civilization isn't measured by the coin in your purse," Kael retorted. "It is measured by the honor you show. And you, sir, have no honor." It was at that moment that one of Blackwood's own men, an older farmhand with a face weathered by years under the sun, stepped forward. "Laird Blackwood," he said uneasily. "I came here believing we were to rescue a kidnapped girl, but this doesn't look like a kidnapping." "Hold your tongue, Thomas," Blackwood screamed. "I pay you to obey, not to think." But the man's words had planted a seed of doubt among the other men. They began to murmur amongst themselves, questioning the version of events that Blackwood had fed them. "Enough of this farce," Blackwood declared, drawing a pistol. "Elara, you will come with me now, or I will shoot this Highlander where he stands." Elara placed herself between Kael and the pistol, shielding both the man who had saved them and the children in her arms. "No," she cried. "If you shoot him, you will have to kill me too." "And me," a new voice boomed from the darkness. All heads turned towards the sound, and from the swirling mists figures emerged that made Kael's heart swell with hope. It was a party of Highland clansmen led by an old man he recognized instantly. It was Eamon, the chief of the clan of the Grey Falcon, his own uncle. "We have come for our kinsman," the old man declared with quiet authority, "and for the woman who carries the blood of our ancestors." The standoff had taken a turn Silas Blackwood had not foreseen. He was no longer a powerful man threatening helpless refugees. He was now facing an entire clan come to protect its own. The arrival of the Highland clansmen completely changed the balance of power. Silas Blackwood, who moments before had been arrogant and threatening, now looked nervously at the 15 warriors who had materialized from the Highland mist like avenging spirits. His own men, the farmhands and laborers he had brought for intimidation, began to back away instinctively, realizing they had been dragged into something far more dangerous than they had imagined. The old man Eamon stepped forward with the quiet dignity of one who has lived 70 years accumulating wisdom and respect. His presence was formidable not for his physical size but for the spiritual authority that radiated from his every movement. He wore the ceremonial markings of a clan chief, and his deep-set eyes took in the situation in a single, sweeping glance. "Nephew," he said, addressing Kael in their ancient Gaelic tongue. "The winds of the moor brought us word that you had found family again. We have come to honor our ancestors and uphold our traditions." Kael felt his heart flood with emotion. For 3 years he had believed he was utterly alone in the world, that his clan had been completely destroyed. But now to discover that members had survived, that his ancestral family was not entirely gone, was overwhelming. "Uncle," he replied, his own voice thick with feeling. "This woman, she carries the blood of Lyra of the Heather Glen. She and her children have found shelter in our hearts." Eamon turned his gaze to Elara, studying her with eyes that seemed to see past physical appearances. "Come closer, daughter," he said in perfect English, surprising everyone with his command of the language. Show me the sign that confirms your lineage. Elara, trembling but resolute, approached the old man. Carefully she pushed back her hair to reveal a tiny crescent moon-shaped birthmark behind her right ear. Eamon examined it closely, and his expression softened into one of profound respect. It is the family mark of the Heather Glen line, he declared for all to hear. This woman is truly our blood. These children are our grandchildren by the laws of our ancestors. Silas Blackwood, who had been listening in stern silence, finally erupted. This is ridiculous. You cannot lay claim to my children based on some savage superstition. I am their father. I have the legal right. Right? Eamon asked, his voice dangerously calm. You speak of rights. The man who violates a helpless woman, who casts a new mother and her infant children out into the wilderness to die. I did no such thing. Blackwood protested, but his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. It was then that Thomas, the older farmhand, who had first questioned his master, stepped forward again. Laird Blackwood, he said, his voice steady now. I've worked for you for 15 years. I have seen how you treat the young women who work in your house. I have seen how you threaten them, how you humiliate them. Thomas, I order you to be silent. Blackwood roared, but the farmhand continued. I saw him cast Elara out that night, Thomas went on, now addressing the Highland warriors. I saw her leave in tears with the babies, with no money and no food. I wanted to help her, but he threatened me with dismissal if I did. Other farmhands began to nod, confirming Thomas' words. The facade of Silas Blackwood's respectability was crumbling before everyone's eyes. You don't understand. Blackwood shouted desperately. Those children could have a future. They could be gentlemen, civilized, they could inherit my lands. To be what? Elara asked, her voice now loud and clear. To be men like you. To learn that power gives you the right to harm the innocent? To grow up believing women are objects to be used and discarded? She strode towards Blackwood, fearless, holding her children with pride. I would rather my sons grow up in poverty with honor than in wealth without a soul. I would rather they learn to respect women, to protect the weak, to find their strength in compassion. Eamon raised his ceremonial staff, and an immediate silence fell over the clearing. In our tradition, he declared, his voice echoing in the night, when a man commits such a crime against a woman of our clan, he must face the justice of the ancestors. This is not legal. Blackwood protested. You have no authority here. We have the authority that our spilled blood gives us, Eamon answered. The authority that the suffering of our people gives us. The authority that the spirits of our ancestors give us. One of the younger warriors stepped forward. Chief, he said, this man has stolen lands that belonged to our people. I have seen the false documents he used to claim sacred territory. It's a lie. Blackwood shrieked, but his voice had become thin, desperate. Is it a lie? Eamon asked, pulling a rolled parchment from within his robes, that these are the forged papers we found in your manor? Is it a lie that you have been selling lands that never belonged to you? Blackwood's face turned a deathly white. The documents Eamon held were irrefutable proof of years of fraud and land theft. Listen to me very carefully, Silas Blackwood, the old man continued with absolute authority. The ancestors have spoken. Your punishment will be to live with the truth of who you are. You will be stripped of all the lands you have stolen. Your name will be known throughout these parts as that of a man without honor. He added, looking toward Elara and the children, but more importantly, you will never again lay claim to these children. They will grow up knowing the true nature of their father and the true nature of their family. He gestured to Kael. Kael moved to Elara's side and together they stood before Eamon. Uncle, Kael said, I ask for your permission to take this woman as my wife according to our traditions. I ask for your permission to claim these children as my own. And you, daughter? Eamon asked Elara. Do you accept this man as your husband? Do you accept the role of mother to his future children and keeper of his heart? Elara looked at Kael, her eyes overflowing with love and gratitude. Yes, she said in a clear voice. I accept him as my husband. I accept the charge of his heart as he has cared for mine. Eamon smiled a smile that was like the sun rising in the middle of the night. Then by the power vested in me by our ancestors, I declare you joined in sacred hand fasting. May your hearts beat as one. May your spirits fly together. And may your children grow in wisdom and in honor. The Highland warriors erupted in a joyous cheer while Silas Blackwood, defeated and shamed, slunk away with what was left of his men. His reign of terror was over, and with it the threat that had haunted Elara was gone. 5 years later, in a thriving little community that had grown up around Kael's old stone bothy, a happy family watched the sunset from the porch of their expanded home. Elara, now a respected healer and the mother of 5 children, leaned against her husband's shoulder as they watched Finn and Willow, now bright 6-year-olds, teaching their younger siblings how to weave heather baskets. Do you ever regret it? Kael asked her, as he had so many times over the years. Never, Elara answered, her hand resting gently on her belly where their 6th child was growing. Every single tear I shed led me here. It led me to you. It led me to this, a family born from true love. In the distance the children's laughter mixed with the Highland wind, carrying a prayer of gratitude to the stars. A prayer for a family that had found light after the darkness and love after the pain. If this story of resilience and love found in the darkest of times moved you, let us know in the comments below. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even after the greatest storm, a new dawn can break. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart.